What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
Running gear. Braking system brakes on the Octavia are simple and quite effective. ABS is in base, ESP, not always, especially before restyling. And if to forget about a history with disinhibition in turns and on bumps, the known problem of all Volkswagen-like of the middle. Of null, everything works perfectly. The front calipers are single-cylinder with a floating bracket. With minimal care, their 10 years they serve reliably. Most of the cars have no brake problems yet. Discs are rarely driven, mostly in case of obvious violation of all rules of machine operation or caliper malfunction. And what discs? Even original pads are surprisingly wear-resistant. There are examples of their durability for 100,000. Rear brakes are not distinguished by anything worse than souring of the handbrake mechanism. Screwdrive and aluminum caliper do their black business. The resource of pads is less, corroded points of mud shields fastening are more frequent, but in general everything is very reliable. ABS failures due to sensors do happen, but are more often related to connector problems than sensor failures themselves. Part original price of non-original 2 brake system front brake pads 3938 3979 Finwale 1232 rear. Pads 1676 83 584 Finwale 787 brake disc front 288 by 25 4 157 83 810 Febby 2 372 brake disc rear 253 by 10 2 817 82 138 Febby. 1.4 suspension. Its design is typical for cars on the PQ35 platform, McPherson and Multilink. With the package for bad roads, that is with increased ground clearance and additional dust covers, the suspension quietly lives. Up to 120 to 150,000 kilometers of mileage without serious interventions. Front levers are almost always steel, and the ball bearing is replaceable. Even cars from Europe, station wagons, Laurin and Amp, Clement and Scout, for the Russian market have levers made of steel, only rare. Grey imports are found with aluminum ones. The rear multi-lever arm is quite simple, with, again, replaceable arm silent blocks. The most expensive components of suspension are active shock absorbers, which are rarely found. Of course, if you drive a lot on unpaved roads with a full load, then the resource of the rear elements will be significantly lower. For the sake of prolongation of life in such cases are stiffer springs and even silence from Audi RS3. After 140 to 150,000 mileage, almost certainly, the owner will have a big repair with replacement of ball and support bearings in front and almost all rubbers in rear suspension. Part original price of non-original 2 suspension front L-arm 11 489 Lemfeder 4031 Febby 5 493 rear support. Arm 4015 Lemfeder 1 561 Febby 1 565 front shock absorber 8 773 Monroe 4 628 Boge 5 437 ball bearing. Steel arm 2 765 Lemfeder. 2033 AS Metal 742 front hub 6 903 FAG 4 387 SKF 4 194 silent block of rear transverse lower arm outer 680 Febby 490 GKN 600 steering. Octavia's powertrain is ZF of the second generation, as on Passat B6. It is adjusted not in the best way, but now it is not a problem, for those who want to get more clear steering and heavy steering. There are available firmware from Audi RS3 or, say, Golf R. Minuses of the second generation of rack and pinion are known. Souring joints, which were not filled with grease at the factory, eventually start to knock. Poor sealing of both the rack housing and electronics. Sometimes the shaft torque sensor fails due to a broken cable. It is better to renew the lubricant in the rail in advance, but in case of what all breakdowns are relatively inexpensive to repair. If it was possible to bump the rail really strongly, second-hand variants are inexpensive, but it is better in this case to put a third-generation rail, for example, from Golf 6-7 or from Audi Q3. Mismatch of one mount on the subframe and wiring connector services have learned to correct easily potential problems on electrics. Such coal-hosing does not carry, but there are more chances to find a part with low mileage, and its reliability is even higher. Transmission. General problems. Almost all cars are front-wheel drive, and the mechanical part is simple and reliable. The splines do not rust, the inner ball joints last long, but the outer ones can start knocking even after 120. It's a matter of luck. But most owners have no problems with them until mileage 250 or more. Mechanical boxes, strangely enough, there are enough cars with mechanics, and Octavia has quite a decent choice of gearboxes. These are 5-speed boxes of Series 0A4 and 0AF for 1, 4, and 1, 6, and also 6-speed 2Q, 02S, and 0AG with dual-mass flywheel 4, 1, 8, 2, 0, and diesel engines. In total, there are more than 24 varieties of boxes. The boxes themselves are strong enough, but differentials everywhere are weak, not liking slippage, as well as dirty oil or its absence, especially in combination of the first with the second. The flywheel fails the 6-speed. If it starts to luff, it eventually breaks the bearings of the primary shaft. The common trouble of all types of automatic transmission is wear of switching mechanism and its vagaries. Wear of cable tips and slider of the mechanism leads to difficult gear engagement and increased backlash. Automatic boxes. There are only 3 types of automatic boxes for Octavia: 6-speed hydromechanical automatic ASIN 9G and 2 pre-selective boxes, DSG types DQ200 and DQ250. In its time, the automatic ASIN was considered to be an exemplary choice. It is a classic, and a real automatic should be reliable. In practice, it is not quite so. The box is undoubtedly quite strong, very comfortable, and convenient in work. But with reliability, everything is not so unambiguous. The box is dedicated. This is a separate large material, but it is not superfluous to mention the main points. There are 2 problems with this box on Octavia with any of the motors. The first is frequent overheating. The used cooling scheme works more like a heating system. The heat exchanger has a thermostat on the engine side, and antifreeze goes into the box only if the engine is warmed up to 95+ degrees, so the standard temperature of the box here is 100 to 115 degrees. As the heat exchanger gets overgrown with deposits on the inside, and with infrequent antifreeze changes, it's literally 5 years, the temperature starts to rise further. Too hot oil kills the whole box pretty quickly. It is possible to reduce the temperature a little by simply removing the thermostat in the sleeve, which will allow the box to warm up less, even without modifications to the cooling system. It is especially effective if the engine also has a cold thermostat at 85 to 90 degrees. Still, it is not a panacea. Heat exchanger is mortal, so it is worth to monitor the temperature in the box with a diagnostic scanner regularly, even if the thermostat is removed. And even better, install an external cooling radiator, as this box does not need a large one. The second problem is the oil change schedule and the sensitivity of ASIN hydraulic blocks to the presence of wear products in it. Officials are in no hurry to change the oil even at 60,000 miles, and to preserve the life of the hydrolock it is necessary to do it even more often. Owners, as always, save money. As a result of a combination of 2 factors, most cars have 120 to 150,000 mileage, the box kicks. The reason, as a rule, is that the pistons are torn, they are overheated and have lost elasticity, and also the body of the hydroblock plate is worn out, there are leaks in the valves, and, possibly, the hydroplate is clogged. If you continue to drive with kicks, then the strong mechanical part breaks down. What to do if the automatic transmission has already been brought to its death throes? Do not rush to change to a robot. This is fraught with compatibility problems. You can consider installing a 6-speed from a fresh Polo Rapid. They stand with minimal modifications. You can try to fix it, but the repair may be expensive, as it is the tradition of the box service to change everything by poking and prodding. But even if you get adequate masters, the repair is objectively not cheap because of the complexity. At least it concerns work on the hydraulic block. DSG boxes became a bogeyman for owners by about the 12th year, and with a considerable delay. By that time the reliability of units was already growing, but people's rumor was unstoppable. Now the main horrors of the box have already disappeared. So, a new clutch unit costs literally €200. Mechatronic for exchange will cost about the same amount, and maybe even cheaper. There are solutions to repair pumps, mechatronic housings, hydraulic accumulators, gear forks, and even to restore clutches. In fact, the 7-speed dry DQ200 is now one of the most cost-effective automatics in terms of operating costs. It is worth reading in detail about these boxes in the material, where typical breakdowns and ways of their elimination are sorted out in detail. The problem with the DQ200 specifically on the Octavia is that this box was put not only with 1.4 TSI, but also with 1.8 TSI. The latter were too torquey for a robot, especially if the owner was fond of chip tuning. In fact, the 7-speed DSG without modifications does not withstand more than 250 Nm. For some time, the 2008 to 2009 cars with DQ 201.8 TSI enjoyed the fame of the most problematic Octavias, and the price for them was even lower than for the 1.6 version with a manual. Now, due to the fact that DSG 7 repair has become much more affordable, the skew is not so noticeable or has disappeared altogether. In general, there is nothing to be afraid of, although it would be good to check the service book, what forks are on a particular box and what version of mechatronic. There are still cars on forks with balls and miraculously survived old-style mechatronics. Well, and it is obligatory to carry out a comprehensive computer diagnostics in a specialized service. DQ200 are perfectly diagnosed. DSG 6 DQ250 boxes with wet clutch on Octavia are rare. They were put only on RS, though some quantity of them appeared thanks to swaps. We told in detail about this type in the material about the Volkswagen Tiguan four-wheel drive cars with all-wheel drive were few. They were quite expensive and were brought from Europe. And the all-wheel drive with a clutch Haldex 4 is not bad. Only oil should be changed in time and follow the wiring. Motors. General problems. The line of motors in Russian cars is quite diverse. On the one hand, very simple and strong motors 1.6 MPI, 8-valve BSE and related to it. On the other hand, there are a lot of cars with 1.8 TSI of different series and a significant number of 1.4 TSI. Everything else is much rarer. All pre-restyled 1.4 MPI, 1.6 FSI, and 2.0 FSI, restyled 1.2 TSI, as well as diesels and forced 2.0 TSI are found, but rarely. The fate of cars with direct injection and supercharging was unenviable. The Octavia remained a mass-produced and quite affordable car, and its service culture was quite low. Owners often learned about what kind of a beast they got in their hands when oil consumption suddenly increased to a litre per thousand. And there were difficulties with starting. From that era, myths that a turbo engine must eat oil on the one hand, and a rabid turbophobia on the other. Gasoline engines. The unambiguous leader in terms of simplicity and reliability is the 1.6 MPI motor, which is the old EA113 range. In the most conservative version with 8-valve cylinder head and conventional injection. The block is aluminum, with cast iron liners, timing is belt-driven, oil pump drive is chain-driven. The most common variant is BSE, without EGR and with regulated intake. There are also variants BGU, BSF, and CCSA with modernized cylinder head, lightweight piston and adjusted intake, but this motor is still very simple and compact. Repair of these motors is relatively inexpensive. There are even repair sizes of pistons for the worst-case scenario. Belt drive timing can potentially serve 150,000, but it is still desirable to change the belt once in 60. From disadvantages, moderately pronounced tendency to oil rings and leaky intake due to the peculiarities of the intake manifold, as well as cracks of the exhaust manifold. We can also note not very successful ignition coils and oil leaks from oil seals and gaskets, as well as crankcase ventilation. An indirect disadvantage is a modest output, 102 forces. This is very little for a fairly heavy car, so the motor for active movement. In the city you need to spin. In combination with congenital bad mobility of piston rings, it gives a significant wear of the piston at mileage over 250. However, with careful operation these motors can run 500 plus before overhaul, and with oil appetite many drive for years, as long as there is compression. Apart from 1.6 MPI motors of EA113 range are found on Octavia in 3 more variants. Extremely rare 8-valve 2.0 MPI cannot be found, but it is a pity. The motor is structurally similar to the 1.6, but better, simply because it has more traction. Motors 2.0 FSI 150 horsepower BLR/BVZ/BLY also belong to this range, but they have 16-valve cylinder head with expensive timing chain drive and phaser regulator, as well as direct injection. Maintenance of such a motor is significantly more expensive, especially at an older age. There are no repair sizes, plus it has obvious difficulties with cold starting, especially in severe frosts over 20. Rare motor 2.0 TSI 200 horsepower BWA, put on RS, also belongs to EA113 series, but the differences are serious enough. The cylinder head is also 16-valve and the timing is also chain-driven, as on the 2.0 FSI, but the cylinder block is cast iron, not aluminum. As you might guess from the power and the TSI acronym, there's turbocharging here. There are no repair sizes, but the block, if anything, is perfectly lined to the nominal. With cold start it is much better. Although the injection is direct, its control system is completely different, more successful. BWA is very fond of tuners. Its boost potential is even higher than that of the later EA888 2.0 TSI motors. The 1.4 TSI 122 horsepower. This is a completely different series EA111. Cast iron block, 16-valve cylinder head, chain timing, turbocharging, direct injection. Moreover, the intermediate air cooler of the motor is liquid, on 1.8, 2.0, and diesel engines, air, and the heat exchanger is built into the intake manifold. About 10 years ago, this engine could be called problematic. Very often there were troubles with timing chain life, more precisely, with chain slippage due to unsuccessful tensioner and front cover. In combination with complex fuel equipment and tendency to detonation due to temperature increase at the inlet and at the same time. Weak piston group, they made the resource of 1.4 TSI unpredictable. Besides, it took a long time to warm up in winter, and only DSG DQ200 box was put in pair with it. In city conditions it was possible to drive only 30 to 40,000 before oiling and repair or to face failure because of timing, and it was possible to drive several 100,000. Shortcomings of the engines were eliminated for a very long time. In fact, the motors of this line were brought up to date only by the appearance of the next generation Octavia. Its 122 horsepower version became omnivorous, no longer requiring 98-grade gasoline in everyday use. Issues with timing were solved by changing all problematic elements. Then prices for all frequently changed components fell, and now Caxa series motors do not look so bad against the general background, especially those after 2011 or those that have undergone quality repairs. The resource of the piston group is consistently more than 300,000. They are now inexpensive to repair, they are not very prone to oil appetite, and the design is simple. From disadvantages there remained only long warming up and unsuccessful hot part of turbine. In general, read about problems of EA111 motors in a separate material, and do not forget that almost all listed problems are now being treated more from the EA111 lineup on Octavia. There are 1.6 FSI of BLF series, and in theory there are possible cars with 1.2 TSI engine with CBZB motor, but such cars are rarely sold. In fact, there are no serious differences in operation from the 1.4 TSI. The motors are even a little simpler, one without supercharger, the second with a simple 8-valve cylinder head. There are much more problems with EA888 engines on Octavia than with small TSI. For understanding, it is better to read 2 articles about these motors, separately about oil buildup and about everything else. It is interesting that the BYJ/BZB 160 horsepower engines of EA888 Gen 1 line, which appeared in 2008, were not noticed in oil addiction. More precisely, it appeared at failure of the crankcase gas ventilation system valve and at turbine death, but due to the piston group. Only at its wear and at mileage of 250 plus, rarely earlier. Another thing that they were not problem-free, with very weak timing with extremely unsuccessful slipping tensioner and low resource chain. They usually passed less than 120,000 kilometers before replacement, and the price of replacement is many times higher than that of 1.4 motors. Moreover, the lubrication system of the whole line is not particularly successful, and the use of raw oil supply to the liners of balancer shafts and installation of mini filters nets in them was a frankly bad decision. The shafts were sticking, and the timing was breaking. Desperately flowed pumps, not debugged fuel equipment malfunctioned. In short, these are quite troublesome motors, and first of all due to the raw design. At installation of components of timing and ECG from the second generation and modifications, these motors are still used today. But on the most part of Octavia A5 EA888 motors are quite different. EA888 Gen 2 line, theoretically improved, but in practice, even more problematic. The second generation of EA888 in the form of CDA-B and CDA-A 152 horsepower motors appeared by the end of 2009. With Gen 1 motors have a common basic design, but few common details. There is a Leighton block and Leighton pistons, other VKG, timing, control system, and exhaust manifold. Improvements were clearly not in favor. Oil buildup in such motors often appeared during the warranty period. You can read about attempts to replace the pistons in the article at the link above. In the context of buying Octavia of the second generation, we are interested in a practical moment, the condition of these motors today. Yes, the motors can be refined and deprived of oil appetite. But such modernized variants in the population are by no means the majority. Frankly unsuccessful engines were made up to 2011 and before the appearance of the block with number 221245, they need a new piston group without variants. In theory, there are technologies of reworking, but it is all cheap coal-horsing. In addition, it is worth preventively changing the timing tensioner. But there will still be problems with low oil pressure and, as a consequence, wear of the front camshaft support and balancer failures. As with the EA111, the price of components and repairs is gradually decreasing, but all other things being equal, servicing a 1.8 TSI will be more expensive than a 1.4 TSI. And of course, the motor needs to be diagnosed very carefully. Diesel motors, there are not many diesel motors, but there is a sense to say about them in a short line. They are strong enough that pre-restyling EA188 with pump jets, that post-restyling EA189 with common rail. The early 16-valve 2.0 motors of 188 series AZV, BMM, and BMN stand out against the general background. Here is not very successful. Prone to cracking of the cylinder head. Common rail motors have piezoelectric injectors, comparatively expensive, but still cheaper than pump injectors. There are still common problems with intake manifold flaps, but these are usually already solved. The main problems of diesel engines on Octavia are usually not constructive at all. It is just difficult to find cars with mileage. Up to 200 to 300,000, they are almost all imported from Europe, and they are usually taken to drive a lot. Part original price of non-original 2-engine radiator 16 196 Bear 9 602 Nissan's 4361 timing chain 2.0. TSI 5 783 Febi 4 533 H1 227 chain tensioner 3 745 CGA 1 210 timing belt kit 2.0 TDI 12 941 Daco 8 747 senior 9 290 timing belt kit with pump 2.0 TSI not available SKF 9 745 all 4 motors 11 937 2.0 TSI 17 824 17 819 Hitachi 2020 Bosch 10 916 to take or not to take. The second generation Octavia has no such modification that would be good for everyone. Initial versions with 1.6 are cheap in service, but too low-powered, plus hydromechanical automatic transmission can hardly be considered. A much better choice than DSG. Turbo engines are more dynamic and economical, but both 1.4 TSI and 1.8 TSI do not live for a long time without finalization. By file on a place, it is necessary either to look for a variant where everything is already taken care of, or to take troubles on oneself. It is desirable not to be afraid of repairs and to come to terms with the fact that Octavia is not the car which asks only gasoline. And occasionally, oil change, and then its possession will be quite comfortable. In conclusion, the Skoda Octavia A5 proves to be a reliable choice, with its hydromechanical transmission holding its own against the DSG. Additionally, the 1.4 TSI engine has shown that it can deliver a commendable performance without the fears that once surrounded it. With its blend of efficiency and practicality, the Octavia A5 remains a strong contender in its class, making it a worthy option for those seeking a dependable vehicle. Thank you for watching, and we hope this video has helped clarify some common misconceptions about the Skoda Octavia A5.